Yeah, so thank you, Joanna. Yeah, as Joanna said, I'm John Dales. I work at the Geological Survey of Norway, where I've been developing or working with INSAR for many years, and also working specifically with landslide hazards. I don't have a lot of experience in the field with natural resources exploitation, but we have a lot of good examples here. Okay, there we go. So as Joanna mentioned, we have a series of webinars with various themes. A few weeks ago, we had a general introduction to the service. Today, we're going to give a bit more detail about how you use the service and its relevance to various exploitation of natural resources. And feel free to join in for future webinars, which will have somewhat of an overlap, but also more focus on specific applications. So what is EGMS? This is what I'm going to talk about today, also about the underlying technology and the products. And then we'll get into a little bit more detail than we had in the general introduction about how to use the service, specifically how to use the EGMS Explorer. And then we'll get to the focus of today's webinar, which is EGMS and exploitation of natural resources. And as Joanna said, we will also have quite a bit of time at the end for questions and answers. So what is the service? It's the latest offering from Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. The products are produced using data collected from the Sentinel-1 radar satellite missions, which there have been 1 or 2 satellites from time to time. We're now down to 1 and hopefully have a second one up in the end of this year. The service provides continental scale measurements of ground motion, more than 10 billion locations across the continent. And as with all Copernicus services, EGMS products are free of charge and accessible for everyone to use. So what do we measure? EGMS measures ground motion of features that consistently reflect radar signal back to the satellite. So that means we cannot choose which points on the grounds we measure. The features that we measure can be natural features such as bare rock, or anthropogenic such as buildings and infrastructure. And the type of motion we can measure can be caused by a variety of natural phenomena, for example, subsidence, landslides, deformation of large infrastructure, volcanoes and earthquakes, etc. So let's have a look at the underlying technology. Just a brief review. The data used for creating EGMS products is collected from the Sentinel-1 mission, as I said. This mission ideally comprises 2 identical radar satellites in a near polar orbits 180 degrees apart. Now, radar satellites are active sensors. In other words, they emit pulses of electromagnetic radiation, and then they record the strength of the return, its time delay, and the phase. And unlike optical satellites, radar satellites can collect data regardless of the time of day and the level of cloud cover. EGMS products are made by processing a stack of Sentinel-1 images taken over the same area over time, using a technique which is called radar interferometry, INSAR. If you look at section number, the part 1 of the slide, if an object on the ground has been displaced between 2 successive radar images, even by a small amount, such as a millimeter, the result is a change in the phase of the return signal. And using just 2 radar images, we can measure very large deformations, such as that caused by an earthquake. However, other things, such as changes in the atmosphere between the successive images, can also cause phase changes. By using large stacks of images, we can use advanced algorithms to differentiate between these sources of noise and the motion that we're interested in. The resulting product contains not only the average velocity of each point, as you see in the image on the right, but also the deformation history that you see in that time series plot in the lower center. On the map side, we typically tend to display the images color-coded by the average velocity, with red points moving away from the satellite and blue points moving towards the satellite. So a little bit more about the products that we produce, because we have several. The initial data sets were released, by the way, in the fall last year, and they included data up until the end of 2020. Recently, we updated the data sets to include data from 2021. Going forward, the plan is to update the data sets every year in the third quarter. So this fall, we will release data with including input data, including 2022, and then every year afterwards, there will be an update. There are three main levels of products which we produce. The EGMS basic product is a sort of a standard INSAR product which many people are used to using. This is deformation measured along the line of sight relative to the local surrounding area. These data are not displayed in the Explorer, but they are available for download. The EGMS calibrated product is what is quite new in EGMS. These are the same data as in the EGMS basic data. However, they have been combined with a GNSS-based velocity model for Europe to put everything into a geodetic reference frame. Then we have the EGMS ortho product, which is 2 layers, and that's made from the calibrated product. And the ortho product provides purely vertical and east-west components of the motion. For all of these products, a time series plot revealing the ground motion trends is available by pointing and clicking. Let's look a little bit more in detail about the last 2 products, the calibrated and the ortho. Calibrated data in the menus are grouped into ascending and descending data. The Sentinel-1 satellites are configured, as I said, in a near polar orbit, and each orbit takes about 80 minutes to complete. However, as the Earth is rotating beneath, it actually takes about 12 days for the satellite to come back to the same place and acquire the same image or image of the same area from the same geometry. And as the graphic on the right illustrates, about half of the time the satellite is moving downwards, which we call the descending orbit, and then it's looking towards the west. And the other half of the time, of course, it's coming back up on the other side of the Earth, which is what we call the ascending orbit, and it's looking towards the east. In EGMS, we exploit these 2 geometries to estimate the vertical and horizontal components of motion, and we call these the ortho products. These ortho data are the initial data that are presented when you open the Explorer, the ortho vertical layer. Ortho data are produced on a grid with about a 100 meters grid cell spacing. And for each grid cell, all available calibrated data are used to produce separate ascending and descending displacement time series. They are averaged. And then for all grid cells where there are sufficient data, the vertical and east-west components are estimated. It's important to note that we really cannot measure local north-south motion due to the geometry of the satellite. To illustrate this, let's look at one of the first examples from today's webinar, the Kiruna mine in Sweden. The city of Kiruna in northern Sweden is a mining town, and for more than 50 years, the mining company LKAB has been extracting iron ore from the region. As the extent of the underground operation has increased, the city of Kiruna has begun to experience increased subsidence. The solution chosen is to relocate the city. It's a very interesting study or story. I encourage you to read about it. They are spending approximately hundreds of millions of euros to do this. Anyway, what you see in this image is data from the calibrated ascending data. The red points are moving away from the satellite, while the blue points are moving towards it, relatively speaking. So red is moving either down or to the east, or a combination of these 2. Switching to the descending data, again, we have red moving away and blue moving towards the satellite. So in this case, it means that red is either moving down or to the west, or a combination of these 2. If we combine these 2 data, we get the ortho data set. And here we see the vertical product, the vertical component of the ortho product. And here we see the horizontal component, which is quite significant. And finally, just to illustrate the difference between calibrated and ortho in terms of resolution, Here we see another example, which we'll return to later in southern Spain, where there's a lot of deformation due to groundwater withdrawal. Here we see both the calibrated data and the ortho data displayed. I've increased the size of the ortho points just to illustrate how much data from the calibrated goes into the ortho. Ortho data is very useful to show the relative components of vertical and east-west deformation, but the calibrated data have a much higher resolution. And this is important to keep in mind when you're looking at local deformation. Please remember to turn on the higher resolution layers to get more information. There are some limitations to keep in mind. First, as mentioned earlier, we cannot choose where to measure ground motion. Areas with significant vegetation, for example, do not provide a consistent radar signal. Second, although we can measure the rate of motion within millimeter precision, we only know the location of what we're measuring within approximately 10 meters or so. And this is due to the nature of the radar geometry. Sentinel-1 data is captured with ground cells measuring approximately 20 by 5 meters. And the maximum, this is the maximum spatial resolution. Finally, north-south ground motions, as I said, cannot be measured due to the looking direction of satellites. And a lot more information about all of this is available in the product user manual on the EGMS service website. Now let's look a little bit more about the EGMS Explorer. As I previously mentioned, EGMS data sets comprise over 10 billion measurement locations, each with hundreds of individual displacement estimates. The vast scale of this data set required the development of a highly efficient client-server application. As much as possible, we hope that the Explorer online can meet the needs of the end users for interacting with the data. However, the Explorer also provides a search and retrieval capability for downloading products. In the top right corner of the Explorer is a toolbar which provides a number of functions, including the geographical search. Opening the menu on the top left, you get a choice of all the various layers. Background layers available include the Copernicus Very High Resolution Satellite layers from both 2012 and 2018. The 2021 layer will be available when it's complete. Calibrated and ortho products are available for viewing. And data for the overseas departments and regions of France are available in a separate menu called DROM. You can turn layers on and off by clicking on the icon to the left of the layer name. And if you click on the arrow to the right, you will zoom to the extent of the layer. For convenience, you can click on a small checkbox at the top of a group. This will toggle on and off all of the layers underneath the group. In the legend box, you can adjust the scale from medium to high and others, how many millimeters per year, and you can also change the color scale to be a more friendly color scale, for example, for colorblind people. These settings will apply to all layers that are displayed. However, you can override for individual layers within the legend by clicking on the layer name. The geographic search tool accepts both coordinates and place names, so you can zoom in on a particular city very easily. Even more useful, perhaps, is that you can zoom into your current location, as long as you allow this in the browser or within your mobile device. And speaking of mobile devices, the Explorer adapts itself very well to the size of the window, which means it works very well on mobile devices such as phones and tablets. And this is particularly useful in the field, as you can easily zoom to your current location based on the device's GPS, as I pointed out. In the web browsers, user can zoom and pan using mouse wheel, and on a touchscreen, you can pinch and using 2 fingers. Using the left mouse button or a single finger on a touchscreen, you can pan the map, and by clicking and dragging with the right mouse button, or by using 2 fingers, the map can be rotated and tilted in 3D. And this is something very useful when interpreting data in hilly areas. Clicking on a point reveals the deformation history. And if you have more than one layer activated at the same time, here, for example, east, west, and vertical, if you click on the point, you will get both time series displayed. Similarly, if you want to compare multiple time series, you can hold down the shift button while clicking on multiple points, and you can compare the time series within the time series window. There's also a tool called Compute Average, where you can draw a polygon and see the average displacement for all points within. Here we see an average of 105 points in the orthovertical layer. You can generate a unique URL pointing to your current location and data sets, and this is very useful for sharing with other people. And finally, these three buttons comprise the search and download tools that are available so that you can bring the data into your own systems. To download the data, you must create a user account with EU Logon and sign in. Once logged in, you can search for all three levels of products within the Explorer by drawing a polygon. The search results will be displayed on the map and within a list. You can download individual products by clicking on the download link, but you can also display a list of all of the links, which can be used either within a bulk download tool or by scripting to download data sets in many data sets. All of this information is available in terms of navigation and so on by clicking on the I button, the info in the toolbar, but you can also get a lot more information by clicking on info and coming to the website where all the documentation is available. So now let's get on to the specific applications for this webinar. The webinar is not about how to actually interpret the data. End users typically know far more about the causes of motion than we do. However, over the years, we've seen this type of data used in a multitude of cases and have a pretty good idea of where it's useful. We're just presenting a number of cases where we have seen deformation related to these various topics, or where studies have been published. I'll focus on three main groups of natural resources in the following examples. Minerals and building stone, including surface and underground mining. We'll both look at active mining and also at post-mining deformation. Oil and gas extraction, as well as underground storage, can also lead to significant deformation at both local and regional scales. And finally, we're using more and more of our underground water resources, and this can lead to water shortages, but also to significant changes on the Earth's surface. We've already seen one very dramatic example of deformation due to underground mining in Kiruna. Here's another example from Greece of an open pit coal mine. The calibrated descending data are displayed. Now you notice there's no measurement points on the active areas, and this is because these are constantly being disturbed. However, there's significant motion, both positive and negative, in the surrounding areas. Here we see the calibrated ascending data. Note the reverse in the colors in many areas, if I go back and forth. This is indicating horizontal motion. And we see this if we turn on the east-west layer on the ortho data product. Another example is from Corto Italia. It's the largest open pit mine in Europe. It's located within the city limits of Minas de Rio Tinto in Spain, and it was actively mined up until 1992. Since at least 1994, it has been flooded up to the 16th ring in the mine. And here we can see continuous active deformation around the mine, although it appears to be diminishing with time if you look at the time series plot. And then we can look at a couple of examples from Norway. The Telnes mine is one of the largest titanium mines in Europe. It is the largest titanium mine in Europe. This deposit was discovered already in 1954, and production has been happening since 1960 and is ongoing. Here we see the mine pit with the open pit surrounded by piles of tailings. Again, in the active area of the mine, we do not get information, but we see a lot of long-term settlement in these tailings mounds. And again, you see a slight decrease over time as they reach an equilibrium. Similarly, the Bjørnebotn mine in Finnmark in northern Norway is a large open pit iron mine. Here we see not only deformation in the tailings mines, but also an active area of deformation on the pit wall. And this is, of course, highly relevant to operations. And one final Norwegian example, this is the Dunderlandsdal iron mine. Here we have an open pit mine that is now being extended downwards at an angle. So basically they're undercutting the hanging wall of the material, which slowly collapses in stages, and the ore is then removed. This is done on purpose. Here's a view of the pit and a diagram showing where the carved zone is. In the descending calibrated data, we see the usual deformation in the tailings mounds around the mine, but there's also active deformation in the hanging wall of the cut. The same pattern is seen in the ascending data. The authors of this study used the INSAR to determine and monitor the extent of this active deformation zone. And speaking of tailings, these have all been solid, dry tailing mounds around the mines. But of course, we have had many incidents around the world of liquid tailings being held back by tailings dams, which have failed. And this picture here is a picture where there was an accident in Hungary in 2010, Ike aluminum plant. While not directly related to nearby mineral exploration, these types of tailing dams are common around mines around the world. EGMS can potentially detect precursor deformation around the ponds. Moving further south, we come to a salt mine at Veendam near Groningen, Netherlands. The salt is retrieved from far beneath the ground by a process known as solution mining. A pipe reaches down to a depth of 1,600 meters where water is transported. The water is heated by the earth and dissolves the magnesium salt, which is then pumped back up via a second pipe. Unfortunately for the residents in this area, this extraction has led to significant subsidence and damage to houses. Here we see both the ascending and descending calibrated datasets turned on, as well as the time series for a given point. Notice the abrupt increase in subsidence rate from 2018 as production apparently increased. Now we don't have to move very far from this to see our first example of deformation due to hydrocarbon extraction. Here you see the salt mine in the lower center part of the map. But also you see a very large area of subsidence around. This is the Groningen gas field, which was first utilized in 1959. Since then, progressive subsidence has not only damaged homes due to the deformation, but also triggered earthquakes. In fact, since the first earthquake was measured in 1986, there's been more than 1,000 since then. Most have been quite small, but in 2012, the province was hit by a quake measuring 3.6 on the Richter scale. This caused considerable damage to hundreds of homes and other buildings. So in 2018, the government has decided that gas extraction will stop altogether by 2030. Moving to Romania, the Suplacu de Barco oil field is the largest oil field in that country. And this one is operated by a technique known as in situ combustion. An oxygen-containing gas is injected into the reservoir where it reacts with the crude oil to create a high temperature combustion zone, heating the oil and making it more fluid, which makes it easier to extract. Here I've turned on both ascending and descending data sets in the Explorer, and you can see there is a clear horizontal commotion for local deformation. The Po River Delta area and surrounding areas in northeastern Italy have a very complicated pattern of deformation due to several processes, both natural and anthropogenic. Of the anthropogenic causes, the most important is the use of groundwater and gas extraction, such as in the Valle de Comacchio, which is shown in the inset map here. And this leads us to our last class of resources, which is water. Perhaps the most striking example of subsidence due to groundwater extraction is the Alto Guadalentine Basin, located in the Lorca area of southern Spain. This area's experiences has been reported as much as 10 centimeters per year of subsidence, while 6 centimeters per year are more typical. Here we see the orthovertical layer displayed. The time series window has both vertical and east-west curves displayed for that given point. Here we see the ortho east-west layer displayed with the same time series. The pattern of red, which is west moving, and blue, which is east moving points, indicates a pattern of movement towards the center of the basin. However, the magnitude of this horizontal movement is much less than 1 centimeter per year. In Bologna, Italy, water extraction, mostly for agricultural purposes, also leads to long-term subsidence. Here we see the ortho-vertical layer. The point displayed has a velocity of about 2 centimeters per year. Looking more closely at the same area, using the calibrated data, it's easy to determine exactly which areas are most affected. And our final example comes from Iceland, related to water, final example related to water. Most of the red and blue areas in this figure are the combined result of tectonic motion and recent volcanic activity. The small red area on the southwest tip of the peninsula, on the other hand, is the location of a geothermal energy plant, one of several in Iceland. The Reykjanes power station uses steam and brine from a reservoir about 300 degrees Celsius, extracted using 12 wells reaching down to 2.7 kilometers in depth. And despite the depth of the extraction area, surface deformation is still about 2 centimeters per year. Hopefully these examples give a good overview of how and where EGMS can be used and relevant to resource exploitation. A lot of public documentation is available on the EGMS website. Product manual, user manual gives an introduction again and the guide to use of the products similar to what we've given today. And the end user interface manual outlines in detail the functionality of the EGMS Explorer, which I presented today. There are also very full documentation of the algorithms that we use. I'd also like to emphasize the existence of a dedicated EGMS help desk to provide support and answer any questions. And you can also use the help desk to give us feedback about the service so that we can make improvements. The help desk can be reached using the contact form when you click help on the top corner of the Explorer. And please remember that if you're asking about a specific area, it's very useful to include a link to what you're looking at, such as I showed earlier in the presentation. And again, please join us for one of the upcoming webinars as well. The registration is open an hour ahead of time. And as with this one, there'll be a Q&A session at the end where you can ask specific questions. Thank you very much. Back to you, Joanna.